is Araceli Pons, and today I'm going to talk to you about deaf culture in school systems in Japan while relating it to the 2016 anime A Silent Voice. Just a heads up before I fully get into the presentation that there are mentions of suicide and bullying, so for the slides where I talk about certain scenarios, I will let you guys know beforehand so you can skip over the slide. I will also be leaving timestamps in my discussion post on what times you should skip if you feel the need to. To introduce my topic, I thought I would start by introducing the anime I chose titled A Silent Voice, directed by Naoko Yamada. It revolves around a boy named Shoya who is on the right and a girl named Shoko who is on the left. Shoko is the new girl in school that everyone is intrigued about because she is deaf. But Shoya doesn't take much of a liking to her because he's already known as a bully and she's just an easier target for him. The movie shows them as middle schoolers for a brief time, and then the rest of the time they are shown as high schoolers, and during both periods of Shoko's life, she is bullied by different people, which led to an attempted suicide. It made me question how deaf students in Japan are treated and how they are perceived. According to a blog post written by a Japanese deaf person, deafness is an impairment, not necessarily a disability, but illiteracy is a disability, which is an issue in the deaf community. There are many grammatical differences between spoken word Japanese and signed Japanese, or JSL. A petition was submitted by 64 parents of 43 deaf children, where they claim their children's rights to education was being infringed upon due to school lessons that aren't taught in Japanese Sign Language. And I know what most of you may be thinking, why don't they just go to a school for the deaf? Sadly, it isn't that simple. Many schools for the hearing impaired teach their lessons using an oral approach, where the students wear hearing aids and listen to teachers that speak Japanese. This approach doesn't help students who are fully deaf, and even students with partial hearing who state that they even have trouble understanding their teachers because of the grammatical differences between JSL and spoken Japanese. The lack of education deaf students are getting are so bad sometimes that 13-year-olds can only read at a second grade level. And to put that into perspective for us, someone who should be ready to read The Hunger Games can only read material like Frog and Toad. This picture I have here shows Shoko's aide, suggesting a mere 3-minute Japanese Sign Language lesson at the beginning of every class. She said it's easier for Shoko to use sign language, and instead of her usual notebook, which is used by her classmates to communicate with her. To which a student named Naoka Ueno says, "It's easier for me to write than to use sign language." Here she is trying to claim that her wants are more important than Shoko's needs. And this is sadly what has happened in many Japanese school systems. And because of this distinct separation between Shoko and her classmates, we get to the topic of bullying. So, the Japanese concepts of bullying are ijime and amae. Ijime means to torment or bully through abuse, social exclusion, and psychological torment. And amae means to act like a spoiled child or to depend on another person's goodwill. This is a quote from an article of a journal I found titled The Relationship of Ijime and Amae in Japanese Middle School Classrooms. If one person stands out from their peer group, they may be seen as undependable upon by the rest of the group. This causes a subconscious fear among members of the peer group, which then leads to action that attempts to eliminate the difference. This action, often physically violent or emotionally damaging, can be seen as an attempt to strengthen the interdependence amongst members of the classroom at the expense of the bullied student. So, in the next couple of slides, I will be talking about how Shoko was bullied in middle school and in high school. So, it also mentions her attempt at suicide. If you are uncomfortable listening to this, I'll leave a timestamp of where you can continue the presentation in the discussion post. In Shoko's case, some of her classmates openly made fun of the way she spoke because she never learned how to pronunciate words as clearly as her classmates. There was an instance where she was in choir with the rest of the students and she came in early. A student said, "We are in serious trouble for the choir contest." Shoko also had 8 of her hearing aids ripped out by Shoya, and the final hearing aid he ripped out caused her to bleed. This is the concept of amae and ijime at play. Shoko is the difference of the group, so her classmates tried to eliminate that difference. In the article I mentioned earlier, the author mentioned that due to the severe bullying some Japanese students were put through, they were committing suicide. And some of these children were no older than 13 years old. Those are 8th graders. There's also a higher risk of depression in deaf adolescents that has led to this as well. There was one patient who had intolerable tinnitus and deafness, and because of it, along with their low self-esteem due to bullying, they attempted suicide. Teenagers go through puberty and are worried about finding their place in the social triangle, while deaf students going through puberty are just trying to fit in more than the outsiders are. In the film, Shoko is told by Naoko that she was a burden on others. Shoko apologized for being a burden, which angered Naoko, so she beat her. Shoko soon after attempted suicide, but Shoya caught her in time, saving her life. So, with so few psychologists in mainstream programs able to communicate in sign language, some are using interpreters during assessment procedures, but these may be the same unqualified interpreters used by the teachers. Unfortunately, it is not common to have guidance counselors at schools that speak Japanese Sign Language, and because of this, a lot of deaf students have to rely on their friends, their family, or an aide that they might have that goes to school with them. There are, of course, circumstances where they can get lucky with a guidance counselor who speaks Japanese Sign Language, but again, it isn't very common. 25.6% of the 144 mainstream university and college students in Japan responding to a survey felt that post-secondary institutions were not attractive because there were no special support services. Now, these services aren't limited to counseling. Some of these services are basic necessities for a lot of students, like note takers, trained tutors, and interpreters. So when we look at the fact that Japan's post-secondary institutions had no special support services, it proves an earlier statement correct in how Japanese society views the deaf community, and that is illiteracy is a disability. Although Shoko could have used a guidance counselor or therapy, there did not seem to be any throughout the film. She had her grandmother for a brief period of time before she passed due to natural causes. She had her mother, who was very strict about who she saw, but did it to protect her. She had her younger sister, who was as strict as their mother, but loosened up when she got to know Shoya and his friends. She had Shoya, and she had Miki, who was her first and only friend throughout middle school and into high school. She had a great support system of family and friends, yet she still felt like a burden. In conclusion, there is a lot to be done for the deaf community in Japan. There needs to be more of a selection of services. There are 317,000 people who are deaf in Japan, and although it may not seem like a lot because their population is over 126 million, it should still be of concern. Although Shoko gets to live a happy life after all that she's gone through, people just like her are struggling in real life. So, here's my works cited. That's all I have to say on this topic. I hope everyone is doing well and staying safe. I really recommend this movie. It's a really good watch.